It was a quiet, sunny Saturday afternoon in my typical American suburban neighborhood. I was enjoying a well-earned break from my busy work week, sipping my iced coffee on the porch of my modest but cozy home. My neighborhood was exactly what you'd expect: neatly trimmed lawns, sidewalks lined with trees, and houses with picket fences. Everyone kept to themselves, and the community was tight-knit. It was the kind of place where you could trust your neighbors, and life seemed simple. That is, until Karen, the self-appointed guardian of the Homeowners Association, HOA, decided to make herself known. I had just gotten back from running errands, parking my car in my usual spot along the street in front of my house. There was a lot of space, and honestly, it never seemed to be an issue. I didn't think much of it as I grabbed my groceries and started walking towards my front door. But then I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me," the voice called out, sharp and demanding. I turned around to see none other than Karen standing at the edge of her yard, hands on her hips, glaring at me like I had just committed the most heinous crime. Now, let me tell you, Karen was the kind of person who always had something to say, and not in a friendly, neighborly way. She had an air of authority, but not in a charming or welcoming way. No, she had this oppressive vibe that made everyone avoid her. The next few days felt like a tense waiting game. Karen didn't let up. She'd continued glaring at me every time I walked past her house, always muttering under her breath about the rules I was apparently violating. At this point, I was getting a little tired of the whole thing. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but Karen had a way of making even the smallest issue feel like a full-blown crisis. It wasn't just about the parking anymore. It felt like she was trying to establish some sort of dominance over the neighborhood, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. If she wanted to make a big deal about a simple parking spot, then I was ready for a full-on showdown. I spent the next couple of days researching the HOA rules, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to make sure I had every detail straight. I went through the HOA guidelines thoroughly, reading every word. As expected, there was nothing about street parking. There were a ton of rules about lawn maintenance, garbage pickup, and the color of fences, but nothing about where people could park on public streets. I even went as far as calling the local city hall to double-check, and just as I suspected, street parking was regulated by the city, not the HOA. I had every right to park there, and there was nothing Karen could do to change that. Armed with this information, I felt more confident. If Karen was going to keep pushing this, I was ready to fight back with the facts. But I also knew I couldn't approach this too aggressively. If I made this personal, it would turn into a mess, and I wasn't interested in escalating things unnecessarily. I decided to take a more strategic approach. The next time I saw Karen outside, it was early in the morning, and she was walking her dog. I waited until she was close. A few days passed since my conversation with Mark. Things had been relatively quiet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen would find another way to stir the pot. I went on with my daily life, parking my car in front of my house without issue. But every time I saw Karen in her yard, I couldn't help but feel that familiar tension. She was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. Then, one afternoon, I received an unexpected letter in my mailbox. It was a formal notice from the HOA. The letterhead was crisp, the text typed neatly, and the tone official. My heart sank as I read through it. The letter was a warning that I was in violation of the neighborhood's parking rules, and that I needed to move my car immediately or face a fine. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The HOA was siding with Karen. They were giving me an ultimatum without even acknowledging the facts. I felt a surge of frustration. How could they do this? I had been respectful, I had followed the law, and I had even tried to work things out with Karen through reasonable conversation. But now, it seemed like the HOA was just going to let Karen run the show. I knew I couldn't let this slide. I wasn't going to back down, and I wasn't going to let Karen or the HOA dictate how I lived in my own home. I had to take action, but I couldn't do it alone. I decided to call a few neighbors to see if they had experienced anything similar with Karen. I reached out to Tim, who lived across the street, and Laura, a couple of houses down. Both had lived in the neighborhood for years and were familiar with the HOA's rules. After a few minutes of talking, they confirmed what I had already suspected. Karen had been on a mission to change the rules in the neighborhood for a long time. She had even tried to push for stricter regulations on everything from the color of the houses to what type of landscaping people could have. But every time, she had been shut down. Until now. Tim was especially vocal. "You're not the first one Karen's gone after," he said. "She's been complaining about street parking for months, but she's never been able to get anyone to listen to her. This might be her last shot to try and make something happen." I thanked Tim for the info and promised to keep in touch. It was clear that Karen had been slowly accumulating power, manipulating the HOA board members to get what she wanted. And now, it seemed like it was my turn to stand up against her. But I had to be smart about this. I decided that the best course of action was to call an HOA meeting. I knew I couldn't let this slip through the cracks, especially since Karen had already gotten the HOA on her side. I wasn't sure how many of the neighbors would show up, but I knew I had to make my case and let them know that Karen's version of the story was just that, a version, not the truth. The meeting was set for the following week. I spent the days leading up to it gathering all the documents I could find, including the city's parking laws, HOA guidelines, and even the letter they'd sent me. I knew I had to present a solid case if I wanted to have any chance of overturning their decision. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. It was held in the community center, a small building tucked between a couple of houses.